This was no occasion for caution. Bink strode ahead, hands touching each other before him, arms bowed in a horizontal circle. If he hit a wall, he would only bruise his forearms, better a bruise than the crunch of a dragon's teeth. He did not hit a wall, he struck a mudslick instead. His foot shot out from under, and he took a belly flop. There was water here. Real water, not dragon's breath, a trickle wending down. Down? Down where? Surely to an underground river. That could account for the sudden canyon. The river could have been tunneling for centuries, and suddenly the ground above collapsed, forming the chasm. One phenomenal sinkhole. Now the river was working again, and he would surely drown if he splashed into it, for there was no guarantee that its current was slow or that there was air in its passage. Even if he swam well, he could be consumed by river monsters, the especially vicious kind that frequented dark, cold waters. Bing clawed his way back up to the slope. He found a branching passage leading up and followed it as rapidly as possible. Soon he saw a shaft of light from above. Safe. Safe? Not while the dragon still lurked. Bink dared not dig his way out until it left. He would have to wait, hoping the predator didn't dig this far. He hunkered down, trying not to get any more mud on him. The sounds of the dragon's digging diminished, then ceased altogether. There was silence, but Bink wasn't fooled. Dragons were of the hide and pounce variety generally. At least the land-bound ones were. They could move fast when they moved, but could not keep it up long. A dragon would never successfully run down a deer, for example, even if the deer lacked escapist magic. But dragons were very good at waiting. Bink would have to stay low until he actually heard it move off. It was a long wait, complicated by the cold discomfort of the mud and dark, and his prior wetting by the dragon's breath, plus the fact that he could not be quite sure the dragon was there. This might all be for nothing, and the dragon could be emitting steamy chuckles as it retreated silently. They could be very quiet when they wanted to, and it hunted. This might all be for nothing, and the dragon could be emitting steamy chuckles as it retreated silently. They could be very quiet when they wanted to, and hunted elsewhere. No, that was what the predator wanted him to think. He dared not emerge, or even move, lest the thing hear him. That was why it was so quiet now. It was listening. Dragons had excellent senses. Perhaps that was why they were so common in the wilderness regions, and so feared. They were a survival type. Apparently, his scent had suffused the area, issuing from stray vents, so that it did not give away his precise location. The dragon was not about to wear itself out digging up the entire cave system, but sound or sight would do him in. Now that he was absolutely still, he was cold. This was summer in Xanth, and it really did not get very cold even in winter, for many plants had heat magic, local weather control, or other mechanisms for comfort. But the chasm was sparsely vegetated and sheltered from much of the sun, and the cool air tended to settle and be trapped. It had taken a while for the heat of his exertions to dissipate, but now he was shivering, and he could not afford to shiver too violently. His legs and feet hurt, becoming cramped. To top it off, he felt a scratchiness in his throat. He was coming down with a cold. This present discomfort would hardly help him to throw that off, and he could not go to the village doctor for a medicinal spell. He tried to distract himself by thinking of other things, but he did not care to rehearse yet again the assorted indignities of his bitter childhood, or the frustration of having but not being able to hold a lovely girl like Sabrina because of his lack of magic. The notion of lovely girls reminded him of Wynne. He would not be human if he didn't react to her fantastic face and body, but she was so abysmally stupid, and anyway, he was engaged already, so he had no business thinking of her. His efforts at self-distraction came to nothing. It was better to suffer in mental silence. Then he became aware of something more insidious. It had been in evidence for some time, but he had not been consciously aware of it because of his other concerns. Even unsuccessful distractions did some good. It was a peripheral, almost subliminal thing, a kind of flickering, which vanished when he looked directly at it, but became insistent at the fringe of his vision. What was it? Something natural or something magic? Innocent or sinister? Then he recognized it. A shade. A half-real spirit or ghost or some unquiet dead, doomed to skulk in shadow and night until its wrongs were righted or its evil exonerated. Because the shades could not go abroad by day, or enter light, or intrude in populous places, they represented no threat to ordinary folk in ordinary circumstances. Most were bound to the place of their demise. As Roland had advised Bink long ago, if a shade bothers you, walk away from it. They were easy to escape. This was called pulling the shade. Only if an unwary person foolishly slept near the abode of a shade was he in trouble. It took a shade about an hour to infiltrate a living body, and a person could move away at any time and be free of it. Once Roland, in a fit of uncharacteristic ire, had threatened to stun an annoying trespasser and leave him in the nearest shade barrow. The man had quickly departed. Now Bink was neither stunned nor asleep, but if he moved, the Gap Dragon would pounce. If he did not move, the shade would infiltrate his body. That could be a fate worse than death, really. All because he had tried to rescue a beautiful, vacuous girl from a dragon. In folklore, such a hero always received a most intriguing reward. In reality, the hero was as likely as not to find himself in need of rescue as now. Well, such was real-life justice in Xanth. The shade grew bolder, thinking him helpless or inattentive. It did not glow, it was merely a lesser darkness than that of the cave. He could see it fairly well now, by not looking at it, a vague, mannish outline, very sad. Bink wanted to leap away, but he found the dank wall close behind him, and in any event he could not afford to take a step. No matter how silently he did it, the dragon would hear. He could walk forward, right through the shade, and all he would feel would be a momentary chill, like that of the grave. It had happened on occasion to him before, unpleasant, but hardly critical. But this time the dragon would be on him. Maybe he could run, being fully rested, and get a head start before the dragon woke. The dragon must surely be sleeping, getting its rest, while its keen ears were attuned to the quarry. The shade touched him. Bink jerked his arm away, and the dragon stirred above. It was there all right. Bink froze, and the dragon lost him again. The mere jerk had not been quite enough. The dragon circled, trying to sniff him out. Its huge nose passed over the upper crack. Steam jetted down. The shade retreated in alarm. Then the dragon settled in place, giving up the chase for the moment. It knew its prey would give itself away sooner or later. When it came to waiting, the dragon was much better equipped than the human. One more reptilian twitch, and the end of the tail dropped through the crack, dangling almost to the floor. In order to escape, Bink would have to brush past it. Now what were his chances? Suddenly, Bink had an idea. The dragon was a living, if magical, animal. Why shouldn't the shade take over its body? A shade-dominated dragon would probably have other things on its mind than eating a hiding person. If he could just move over so as to place the dangling tail between him and the shade. He tried, shifting his balance with tedious slowness, trying to lift one foot so as to put it forward, silently. But the moment it lifted, it hurt, and he flinched. The dragon's tail twitched, and Bink had to freeze. This was extremely awkward, because his balance in this semi-squatting position was at best tenuous, and now both feet and ankles felt as if they were on fire. The shade advanced again. Bink tried to ease his foot farther forward so as to achieve a more comfortable balance without falling over. Away from the shade. Again agony shot through him, and again the tail twitched. Once more he froze, in even more discomfort, and yet again the shade moved in. He could not go on this way. The shade touched his shoulder. This time Bink steeled himself not to flinch. He would certainly have lost his balance, and then his life. The touch was hideously cool, not cold. It made his skin crawl. What was he to do? He controlled himself, with continuing effort. It would take an hour or so for the shade to take over his body. He could break the spell at any time before it was complete. The dragon would gobble him down in seconds. Appalling as the notion was, the shade was the better risk. At least it was slow. Maybe in half an hour the dragon would have gone away. Maybe the moon would fall out of the sky and squish the dragon under green cheese too. Why wait for the impossible? If the dragon did not go, then what? Bink just didn't know. But so far he didn't see much choice. The shade moved in inexorably, cooling his shoulder through to the chest and back. Bink felt the intrusion with barely suppressed loathing. How would it be possible to submit to this invasion of the dead? Yet he had to do it, at least for a while, lest the dragon quickly convert him to a shade himself. Or would that be preferable? At least he would die a man. The ghastly cool essence impinged slowly on his head. Now Bink was terrified, yet frozen. He could not lean his head away any farther. The horror crept through, and he felt himself sinking, slipping, being blotted up by... And then he was eerily calm. Peace, the shade said in his mind. The peace of the pine forest, where the sleepers never woke? Bing could not protest aloud because of the dragon's ears, but he gathered himself for a final effort to leap away from this dread position. He would crash past the dragon's tail before the monster could react and take his chance with the subterranean river. "No, friend, I can help you," the shade cried, louder but still silently. Somehow, insidiously, Bink began to believe. The spirit actually seemed sincere. Perhaps it was just in contrast to the alternative, consumption by dragon or drowning in river. "Fair exchange," the shade persisted. "Permit me, for 1 hour. I will save your life, then dissipate, my honest abated." It had the ring of conviction. Bink faced death anyway. If the shade could somehow save him, it would certainly be worth an hour of possession. It was true that shades dissipated once their burden was lifted. But not all shades were honest. The criminal ones sometimes were recalcitrant, choosing not to atone for their crimes in life. Instead, they added to them in death, under cover of the new identity, ruining the reputation of the unlucky person they controlled. After all, the shade had little to lose. He was already dead. Absolution would merely consign him to oblivion or to his place in the infernal regions, depending on his faith. Small wonder some chose never to die completely. "My wife, my child," the shade pleaded. They go hungry, they sorrow, ignorant of my status. I must tell them where the silver tree grows that I died to locate." The silver tree? Bink had heard of the like. A tree with leaves of pure silver, incredibly valuable, for silver was a magical metal. It tended to repel evil magic, and armor made from it resisted magic weapons, and, of course, it could even be used as money. "No, it is for my family," the shade cried. "They may never again dwell in poverty. No, that they may never again dwell in poverty. Do not take it for yourself." That convinced Bink. A dishonest shade would not have promised him everything. A dishonest shade would have promised him everything. This one promised only life, not riches. Agreed, Bink thought, hoping he was not making a dreadful mistake. Trust unwisely given. "Wait until merging is complete," the shade said gratefully. "I cannot help you until I become you." Bink hoped it was no deception, but what, really, did he have to lose? And what did the shade have to gain by a lie? It did not save Bink. If it did not save Bink, it would only share the sensation of being eaten by the dragon. Then they would both be shades, and Bink would be an angry one. He wondered what one shade could do to another. Meanwhile, he waited. At last it was done. He was Donald, the prospector, a man whose talent was flying. "We go!" Donald cried through Bink's light lips exultantly. He put his arms up as if diving and rose straight up through the crack in the ceiling with such power that the edges of rock and dirt were flung aside. The sheer brightness of day blinded them as they emerged. The gap dragon took a moment to orient on this strange occurrence, then pounced, but Donald made another effort, then shot up so swiftly that the huge teeth snapped on air. He kicked the monster in the snout hard. "Ha! Gaptooth!" he yelled. "Chew on this!" And he stomped on the tender portion of the dragon's nose. The jaws gaped open, and a cloud of steam shot out, but Donald was already zooming out of reach. The dragon had no chance to catch them before they were too high. Up, up they sailed, straight out of the canyon, above the trees and slopes. There was no effort other than mental, for this was magic flight. They leveled off, proceeding north across Xanth. In delayed reaction, Bink realized that he had a magic talent. By proxy, certainly, but for the first time in his life, he was experiencing what every other citizen of Xanth experienced. He was performing. Now he knew how it felt. It felt wonderful. The sun bored down from almost straight overhead, for it was now midday. They were up amid the clouds. Bink felt discomfort in his ears, but an automatic reaction by his other self popped them, making the pain abate before it intensified. He didn't know why flying should hurt his ears. Maybe it wasn't because there was enough to hear up here. For the first time, too, he saw the full upper contours of the clouds. From beneath, they were generally flat, but from above, they were elegantly, if randomly, sculptured. What seemed like tiny puffballs from the ground were big masses of fog in person. Donald flew through them with equanimity, but Bink didn't like the loss of vision. He was nervous about banging into something. "Why so high?" he inquired. "I can hardly see the ground." This was an exaggeration. What he meant was that he could not make out the details he was accustomed to. Also, it would have been nice to have some of the people see him flying. He could buzz around the North Village, astounding the scoffers, qualifying for his citizenship. No, that would not be honest. Too bad the most tempting things were not the right to do. I don't want to advertise, Donald said. It could complicate things if people thought I was alive again. Oh, perhaps so. There could be renewed expectations, maybe debts to be paid, one that mere silver would not abate. The Shade's business was necessarily anonymous, at least so far as the community was concerned. See that glint? Donald inquired, pointing down between two clouds. That's the silver oak tree. It's so well hidden it can be spotted only from above, but I can tell my boy exactly where to find it. Then I can rest. I wish you could tell me where to find a magic talent, Bing said wistfully. You don't have one? Every citizen of Xanth has magic. That's why I'm not a citizen, Blink said glumly. They both spoke through the same mouth. I'm going to the good magician. If he can't help me, I'll be exiled. I know the feeling. I spent 2 years exiled in that cave. What happened to you? I was flying home after discovering the silver tree, and a storm came up. I was so excited by the thought of riches that I couldn't wait. I risked the trip in high winds and got blown into the gap. The impact was so great I landed in the cave, but I was already dead. I didn't see any bones. You didn't see any hole in the ground either. The dirt filled in over me, and then my body got washed away by the river. But don't you know anything? It's the place of death that anchors the Shade, not the place of the corpse. Oh, sorry. I hung on, though I knew it was hopeless. Then you came, Donald paused. Look, you've done me such a favor. I'll share the silver with you. There's enough on that tree for both my family and you. Only promise not to tell anyone else where it is. Bink was tempted, but a moment's reflection changed his mind. I need magic, not silver. Without magic, I'll be exiled from Xanth, so I won't be able to share the silver. With magic, I don't care about wealth. So if you want to share it with the tree. Don't take all its leaves, but just a few at a time, and some of the silver acorns that drop, so the tree can go on living in health and perhaps reproduce itself. In the long run, that will be more productive anyway. It was a fortunate day for me when you dropped into my cave, Donald said. He banked into a curve, going down. Bink's ears popped again as they descended. They dropped into a forest glade, then walked half a mile to an isolated, run-down farm. It took that much motion to completely eliminate the lingering cramps in Bink's leg. Isn't it beautiful? Donald inquired. Bink looked at the rickety wooden fence and sagging roof. A few chickens scratched among the weeds, but to a man who had love invested here, love enough to sustain him 2 years after violent death, it must be the fairest of ranches. He said. I know it isn't much, but after that cave, it is like heaven itself, Donald continued. My wife and boy have magic, of course, but it isn't enough. She cures feather fade and chickens, and he makes little dust devils. She brings in barely enough to feed them, but she's a good wife and lovely beyond belief. Now they entered the yard. A 7-year-old boy looked up from the picture he had been making in the dirt. He was making in the dirt. He reminded Bink briefly of the werewolf boy he had left. Was it only 6 hours ago? But that impression was destroyed when this boy opened his mouth. Go away, he yelled. Better I don't tell him, Donald said, a bit taken aback. 2 years, that's a long time for that age. He doesn't recognize this body, but see how he's grown? They knocked on the door. A woman answered, plain in a dingy dress, her hair swept back under a soiled kerchief. In her heyday, she might have been ordinary. Now, hard work had made her old before her time. She hasn't changed a bit, Donald thought admiringly, then aloud, Sally! The woman stared at him with uncomprehending hostility. Sally, don't you know me? I'm back from the dead to wrap up my affairs. Dawn? She exclaimed, her pale eyes lighting at last. Then Bink's arms enfolded her, and his lips kissed hers. He saw her through Donald's overwhelming emotion, and she was good and lovely beyond belief. Donald drew back, staring into the splendor of her love as he spoke. Mark this, darling. 13 miles north-northeast of the small mill pond, beside a small east-west ridge, is the silver tree. Go harvest it, a few leaves at a time so as not to damage it. Market the metal as far away as you can, or get a friend to do it for you. Tell no one of the sort that you're well. Remarry. It will make a fine dowry, and I want you to be happy, and the boy to have a father. Dawn, she repeated, tears of grief and joy in her eyes. I don't care about silver, now that you're back. I'm not back. I'm dead, returning only as a shade to tell you of the tree. Take it, use it, or my struggle has been for nothing. Promise. But, she started, then saw the look on his face. All right, Don, I promise, but I'll never love any other man. My honest is abated. My deed is done, Donald said. One more time, beloved. He bent to kiss her again and dissipated. Bink found himself kissing another man's wife. She knew it immediately and jerked her face away. Sorry, Bink said, mortified. I have to go now. She stared at him, suddenly hard-eyed. What little joy remained in her had been wrung out by the brief manifestation of her husband. What do we owe you, stranger? Nothing. Donald saved my life by flying us away from the Gap Dragon in the chasm. The silver is all yours. I will never see you again. She softened, comprehending that he was not going to take away the silver. Thank you, stranger. Then, on obvious impulse, you could share the silver if you wanted. He told me to marry her. I have no magic, Bink said. I am to be exiled. It was the kindest way he could think of to decline. Not all the silver of Xanth could make this situation attractive to it on any level. Will you stay for a meal? He was hungry, but not that hungry. I must be on my way. Do not tell your son about Donald. He felt it would only hurt the boy. Farewell. Farewell, she said. Momentarily, he saw a hint of the beauty Donald had seen in her. Then that too was lost. Bink turned and left. On the way out of the farm, he saw a whirling dust devil coming toward him, product of the boy's minor malice toward stranger. Bink dodged it and hurried away. He was glad he had done this favor for the prospector, but also relieved that it was done. He had not properly appreciated before what poverty and death could mean to a family.